Welcome to Parents Who Think. Danusia here. Today, I'm joined by Sarah Forbes, an anthropologist who spent years working at the Museum of Sex in New York City. Sarah's perspectives shed light on the cultural significance of sex toys and how they can empower us to embrace our sexuality. Let's get down to it, shall we?
I'm so excited to be joined today with you, Sarah. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm happy to join the conversation. What is the Museum of Sex? So the Museum of Sex in New York, when it opened in 2002, really aimed to be like any other museum, cultural institution, but tackle the subject of sex and sexuality, one that has so many cultural taboos and misconceptions, and from which we don't actually have a lot of, education on the topic.
Yeah, so what I really enjoy about it is that it's not a salacious kind of tourist event, if you like, a kind of pop-up thing that just, is titillate, if you like. I really love that. It's quite the opposite.
Yeah, and I think it's important. You have to have that balance of, I truly believe to have a positive educational experience, it also does need to be fun. I think you need to have a little bit of playfulness, a little bit of humor. I think great design helps you have that experience also. It is not the everyday experience to walk in a museum, see extremely graphic content, and be watching that with strangers. So I think you kind of have to get people comfortable in a space that is very unfamiliar.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So we are taking a slice of your wisdom and knowledge from those years and since then, because I know there's way more than to you than those 12 years, looking at sex toys.
Well, I think when it comes to sex toys, I think we think that it's something brand new and that it's only existed in maybe the last couple of years. And it's true that they've become more popularized and I think more normalized. But sex toys, they've existed for hundreds and hundreds of years, centuries and centuries. People have always created these objects. You have documentation of this all over the world.
Yeah, well, desire and pleasure has been around forever.
It has.
That has, the libido and the urges and wanting is, woven into the experience of being human, surely.
Well, you have these archaeologists and they're digging around sites and they have, like I said, centuries and centuries old and even longer.
Listeners, I had a blurt brewing. Here it is. Are there women that actually are really into sex toys and have collections?
Oh, absolutely. I think, in the last decade or so, what sex toys have changed. And I think the fact that they are no longer just these kind of novelty toy, like gag gift kind of things, they're accessories, they're lifestyle accessories. I think that has helped a lot of women maybe change that idea of like, ooh, I'm not a sex toy woman, to why not be a sex toy woman? I have all kinds of accessories in my life. Why not have another that brings me pleasure and I can maybe use it by myself? But there doesn't need to be a taboo about it anymore.
Yes, it used to be something that we didn't talk about.
I think there's a big difference between shame and just being private. I myself am actually very private about my sexuality. I'm very comfortable in my body. I'm comfortable in my sexuality. I'm comfortable in the kind of the larger space. But I think we all make these different categories for ourselves. And it doesn't mean you're less sexual because you don't maybe talk about it as much. So lots of, sex educators will recommend, if you know your body and you know what kind of sensation your body likes, and you can experiment, because there are so many different kinds of toys. Some toys are penetrative, some toys vibrate, some toys have all kind of different maneuvers. If you experiment with those, and let's just say that starting place is by yourself, you get to know your body better, what you like better. And then, when you communicate that with a partner, and communication is just critical, but you're really opening yourself up to so much possibility of pleasure.
I think the ability to do that on a solo way is fundamental, to give space for that, to give ourselves permission, but also the time and the space to experiment and to spend money on things that might bring us new sensations.
And that's true. And I think a lot of people, when they see the price tags associated sometimes with the higher end sex toys, they'll be like, oh, that feels like too much of a splurge in this phase of my life. And yes, there are some great, less expensive toys, But, when you really think about it, this object potentially going near your most delicate parts of your body, maybe it is that space to splurge on something that could contribute to this side of yourself. And it's not necessarily a selfish splurge. And I think mothers are always guilty of, they put everybody first in every way, and that you taking care of yourself and feeling satisfaction on all levels, it helps us so much in being those caregivers in these extended ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Why do you think the rabbit is often, put forward as the panacea to all, women's orgasmic needs?
I think there's a couple of things to it. I think because it's so well recognized, it feels less taboo to purchase. So on top of that, I think the way that the rabbit is designed, and there's so many companies that have done iterations of this, that it understands that female pleasure and satisfaction is not just penetrative. And it really does focus on clitoral stimulation. The rabbit in particular is combining, penetrative and clitoral stimulation, which is, the more angles that you're going at, the probably more likelihood you are to have an orgasm.
Where do you stand on the G-spot?
I guess for me, and I'm coming to all of this space as an anthropologist, I don't have a medical opinion, but I think if you as a woman feel that you are getting G-spot stimulation, who am I to say that you're not? And I don't think it's, no one's a failure because they were unable to achieve G-spot stimulation. We have different bodies, and what works for one person may not work for another person.
And that's why that experimentation is so important, isn't it? And just really getting to know our own bodies, not worrying about kind of getting hooked into, I think, the narrative about other people's abilities, when really we've got our instrument, if you like, our bodies are our pleasure central zone. That's the thing to really concentrate on.
100%. You can't compare yourself to other people, but you do need to get to know yourself. It's been so interesting for me. So I started at the Museum of Sex, and then, I became a mother myself. As with my professional background, I go to mom coffees and play dates and all of these kinds of things. And the topic of sex always comes up. And it's always the topic of mothers and their relationship to sex and their relationship to their bodies. And then also, how do I talk to my children about it? And I think that the more information you give in an age-appropriate way, starting when they're very young, it just makes it very normal. You don't have to have this big talk moment. When you start a conversation slowly with kind of information over time, it's less traumatic for everybody involved than having to sit down and be like, okay, so here's this thing. I also think, particularly with children, it's empowering, and I think it's a safety measure to be able to talk about your body with accurate words. So to call your penis a penis, my little girl, we've chosen to use the word vagina versus vulva, but she'll talk about her vagina all the time, to my Irish husband's embarrassment, because he has grown up in a very different culture. What, for example, we, talking to some of his Irish friends, and the mother, she's a very progressive woman, but with her daughters, they call it her front butt.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
I had never heard that before. It's very confusing when you don't use the accurate words. For example, my little girl, she's been having urinary problems for the last year. And so her being able to tell me what's going on has been really important. And then the other day at breakfast, and she has, her brother's at the table, and she's like saying something about peeing out of her vagina. I was like, no, you don't pee out of your vagina, you pee out of your urethra. I think there's lots of grown women that don't know exactly where they pee out of and what things are. And my little boy heard that as well. And nobody bats an eyelash. Okay, cool. That is where I pee out of. And that's just kind of how bodies work. When it comes to sex, and it's an expression that my grandma would always use, there's a lid for every pot. Everything and anything can be a sexual turn on for somebody. So watching somebody smoke a cigarette, watching somebody blow up a piece of bubble gum, our sexuality and what feels good on our bodies and different parts of our bodies is so vast. So I think people say that your imagination is actually the most potent form of your sense of self and sexuality. I think sometimes we just get so stuck on genitalia and stimulating genitalia that it misses this larger idea.
Absolutely. When you were in the museum, did you have any pieces around sex dolls?
I've had quite a lot of exposure to them. So there's a company called Abyss Creations, and they are the maker of the Real Doll. And so the Real Doll, people use them for sexual purposes. They also use them for companionship. It's a mimic of a living partnership. So if you, instead of, let's say, living by yourself, you have this entity that, it may not be a sentient entity that keeps you company. There are some Real Doll owners that they will take their Real Doll to the movies. And I think sometimes people will go to a sex worker, not just for the physical sexual act, but also having that moment of intimacy or closeness. Obviously, that's with a person, but this is a proxy to that person. And so a Real Doll is about $10,000, but this is a very large investment. And they make both male and female dolls. And what was so interesting to me, just to observe this as the curator and as an anthropologist, that people were so rough with the body of the female Real Doll, but hardly that way with the male Real Doll. So people would grab the breast of this Real Doll torso. You could touch, her vulval area. So gruff. But you have this male doll, you could touch his chest, you could touch his penis, but people were so hesitant to do so.
What did you make of that?
I think it's one, how we treat female bodies, male bodies, but I also think it's less taboo to touch this woman's body than to touch this man body. For both men, women, heterosexual, not heterosexual, we carry around all of these. Oh, what is somebody going to think about me?
It's fascinating about these dolls. It's absolutely fascinating, and particularly, the combination of things like VR, robots, all of this, the technology that makes the future of sex toys, the possibilities are endless. The Real Dolls, how extraordinary. This is a huge stereotype, but I'm wondering if, from a man's perspective, the romance and the doll relationship would raise a lot of the complaints and the demands of the men in terms of at the emotional level, of connecting on an emotional level.
Yeah, it could. And then maybe you'll have like a surge in the other direction, saying, in the way that some people will, go to a dominatrix that is there to humiliate them and is there to berate them. Sometimes you swing one way and then you go the other way, and your needs change and you want something totally different. So maybe you go from, okay, this human relationship is too much and too many demands, to, no, that's actually exactly what I want. Even for me, this is my worth, this is my space. But you have to be like, wow, will we be like this? Is this the future of society? And I think it's kind of exciting to think about, wow, the world doesn't stay the same. It's a totally different place than it was 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. And because of all of that technology, the change is happening at a more rapid pace.
It's extraordinary. And Sarah, this is we know, wonderfully rich, wide-ranging conversation. Thank you so much for this, because you've got us knowledge that so few people would have.
Like I said, I kind of stumbled into this profession in certain ways. I knew I wanted to study people, but being able to study sexuality, which I didn't plan, has given me almost the best understanding of people and why we do what we do and the nuances to that. It's been a great chat. I have a head full of sex facts, so it's great to be able to share it with people who are interested. Thank you so much.
There we are. I didn't think we'd get into sex dolls in this conversation, but wasn't that enlightening? How about we put shame to bed for good? Till next time, keep thinking and loving. Take care, everyone.